I was discriminated against my whole life because of my golden child sister. Finally, I got my sweet revenge on my wedding day. I faced discrimination my whole life because of my golden child sister, and she even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding. Finally, I got my revenge. My parents always favored my sister, and it was pretty obvious. If she accused me of something, they'd believe her and punish me. But if I accused her, even with undeniable proof, they'd give her a lighter punishment and find a way to scold me too. My birthday cake always had to be her favorite flavor, and my parents pretended they didn't know I hated it. They always bought her more than me and took us where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and used me as a punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got worse when we were teens. She ended up with no friends and her behavior deteriorated. Did her friends move away or ditch her because she was mean? I don't know because we were never close. My parents boasted about her achievements but never mentioned any issues. They were always quick to point out my mistakes. She used my flaws as teasing material. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school. I noticed she was no longer with people while I was fairly popular. My sister realized this and suddenly turned me from an occasional punch bag to someone she needed to take down constantly. She started accusing me and my friends of more things. My parents stopped letting me hang out with anyone, using excuses like, "They're not good people, according to your sister," or "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister?" My extended family saved me from complete isolation. I got along well with my cousins despite some age differences. At one gathering, they invited me to something I don't remember. I sadly replied that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. My kid self bluntly said it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. This got back to the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later, I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month. After that, they gave me some leeway, so it was worth it. My sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of our extended family knowing her social status was too much, so she demanded to switch, and my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was further away. She made friends at the new school, but she never went back, mostly ignoring me. She felt the power to mess with me and was angry that I told the family she had no friends. She never let me go. My life remained difficult. Her friends would come over and my parents called it bullying, but it was more like light teasing. I never invited friends over because my parents were awful hosts, or my sister would accuse them of stealing. My parents would believe her. I did become close to my cousins, though. My parents never dared to treat family that way, so I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted at one point. We were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. She came over in skimpy clothing batting her eyelashes and started telling him how bad I was. My sister told my parents a different story. She said that my boyfriend had tried to flirt with her, but she'd naturally refused. My parents believed her because they thought she was telling the truth. I immediately believed my boyfriend because I was a teen and I was suffering from unfair treatment. I was very resentful and moody and I hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight and liked showing love via food, giving more food, buying treats, etc. My sister was also overweight, whereas I was not. I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand and my parents would deliver. On top of that, she didn't look like some sexy model, even to me. As a teenager, I didn't think my boyfriend would cheat on me with my sister. My parents wouldn't let me date him anyway. I tried to keep it a secret, but it was hard. The relationship ended. I got another boyfriend, but my sister accused him of flirting with her when he rejected her advances. My parents believed her. I tried to explain how this happened, but they didn't listen. They said I couldn't make good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo and Juliet situation and fizzled out. I was fine with making out with boys, but I refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride. My parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why I couldn't be like my sister and find myself someone like that. Then he stopped showing up and suddenly he was a conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well, the unequal treatment continued. She had more spending money and her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older, but when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. When I pointed it out, they denied ever saying that or claimed it was because I couldn't be trusted. They even used my sister's accusations against my boyfriend and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well, she was regarded as one, and she had no scholarship or anything else because only her achievements were told to me. I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I usually got good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming that since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents made a lot of fanfare and told her that I was relieved she'd be going away, not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow stuff kept missing from my room or some other issues she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me that since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. I told my mom that I thought it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and wait until my sister finished university to see if they could afford something for me. I also said that if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, including the bills and rent. I pointed out that I could get student loans, but my mom said no because they were so caring towards me and I had such bad judgment that they would decide if a college was worth my getting into debt or not. I'm not sure how that would work. They said they'd stop me from getting loans. But I didn't ask about scholarships. They didn't know my grades and never believed in my capabilities. I didn't think much of it. I said okay. My mom was surprised. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to never pay for my college. I thanked them for caring and that was that. My dad later tried the same. But I also refused to get emotional. After a lifetime of terrible parenting, I never had any expectations of my education. I knew they'd find an excuse not to pay for it and make my life miserable. I never believed they'd eventually pay if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I'd been preparing for college for a long time. I barely had time for anything else, so I studied a lot. College was my only chance to be free. Well, the time came, and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship, not to any fancy schools like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school. But it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. I knew my sister would hate it and try to stop me, so I put my achievement on social media at the same time I told them. Even forcing myself to thank them in the post, now they couldn't forbid me from going. I had to explain to the family why I initially decided to go to college. They were even a little proud and boasted about it. Then my sister got to them. They even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that my sister wasn't doing well in college. Since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy, but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents. I still visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any men to them, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because again, they'd have made a fuss about it. She moved back home. Paying no bills or rent, but it's different. My parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom. Thanks to my mom pulling strings, this was all presented to me as a point of pride. I met my husband around this time. You know those people who say, if I were in that situation. If I were in that situation, I'd have done something. My husband is the type who actually does. I'm the type who is meek and an AD doormat in any situation. Then I can't sleep at night, wishing I had done something or thought of something witty to say. I'm the person who can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy who. He responds immediately and enjoys resolving conflict. If he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget. He's just doing something worse for revenge. He's the one who wanted me to post here and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board. I also decided that what we did wasn't nuclear. People were surprised that I got together with him, but just because I was incapable of acting like him due to my upbringing didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband treats people well as long as they treat him the same when we discuss. We decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget. We'd rather spend the money on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. We also had to decide where to do it. His family was spread out, and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown. We decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either. We could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff, plus there was some work flexibility so we could stay in my hometown for a bit if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At this point, my parents demanded to meet my men. I wanted to stand up for myself and refuse, but I was struggling. The distance had made me think my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I had cancelled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. He had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high quality he could hide a recorder in his pocket to record it all. He was excited about all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then share the recording of her attempts with my family. He went off by himself and was excited to meet them. He came back later, happy, and told me all about it. Things they wanted. Babe, we can screw them over so badly. There were so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he told me it was better to listen to him first or else I'd misunderstand. He went there, and instead of flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down after. Some grumbled about not being okay with him. My judgment, etc. They said they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition: my sister would walk down the aisle. My parents insisted that my sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding first in a wedding dress. Their excuse was that it wasn't okay for my younger sister was going to get married first, so it was only fair that she had the experience of walking down the aisle at my venue with pictures being taken in her wedding dress. She'd even have a cake later. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband. Here, hell hath no fury like a pro. Revenge, instant karma, nuclear revenge. Lurker, when his beloved is scorned, said as much as my wife. She's my wife now, and she paints me as this quick-witted dude. I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that crap like some sort of great gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time. Methinks, alas, after I did have a whole list of insults ready to spew, but something in my soul told me to think before I acted. I needed to see how my wife and then fiancé would react. I ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. My husband told me that my parents wanted my wedding to be about my sister. He was smiling as he said it, and I have the recording to prove it. I was shocked. I hadn't realized how much things had changed. I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband was on my side. He insisted on the angle of revenge helped me stay calm. We had a great time thinking of ways to get back at them. We came up with ideas that were pretty outlandish to what we thought was feasible. Then, we called his brother, who was a lot more level-headed. When we decided on a plan, it involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, and so on. Well, the level of. My brother told us off for it, but he said he'd never be able to convince us to avoid retaliation. He showed us that some of our other ideas would be hard to pull off, so we eventually settled on the least extreme plan. We agreed to act like we were on the same page, but then we hired security and made sure she wasn't let in. Obviously, if that was all it would be, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. My husband did most of the rest, but he wants me to take the credit, so here goes. Just to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and it was our mutual decision. He went back to my parents and said he'd probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue, and not wanting the family to fall apart, he said he'd be down to help them do it. He pointed out that I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of them. On the other hand, marriage is a big deal. So who knew if I'd lash out? He suggested a compromise: they'd help pay for stuff. This way, I'd feel even more pressure to not say anything. Not only would we be public with our families, but I'd be grateful for the help they gave. He said my parents looked shocked, and my grown sister literally started skipping with joy like a kid. So it was accepted. Also, my husband said that due to some bad judgment and past boyfriends, these words were all my idea. I'm proud of using their words against them. He was distrustful and controlling. He liked to check his phone to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. It was important that nothing about the plan was ever put in writing. He went over to their house to talk about my sister walking down the aisle before me. My parents and sister spent months trying to trick me while my husband and I were actually making money from the wedding. Of course, my parents wanted to be involved in everything, including some things that meant a lot to me like the songs and color palette. My husband convinced them to let it go to keep me in line, but since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was fair game. Here's what we did: we'd go to check the drink and menu options and then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then, my sister and I would go to try it out and then say it's a shame we don't want to take advantage of my parents' generosity. My parents would then tell me not to worry and that they'd pay for the most expensive option. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, and then he sadly expressed how I wanted some other flowers. My parents told me they wanted us to go with the flowers my husband gave my sister, and they'd pay for it when it came to the wedding dress. My parents wanted me to use a dress that wasn't my style and wouldn't look good on me. We had planned to say yes and then simply not use it, but my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me, but I refused to text. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree during all this time, but they kept communications outside of any text. We made sure that happened by having me reply to my sister messaged my husband, which made my husband seem even more uncontrollable and neurotic. They believed it and never risked anything in writing. Some people might not like the thought of their partner talking badly about them to family, but I'm such a doormat that I found the idea of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person extremely funny. I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. He never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had thought about having a courthouse wedding to save money for our honeymoon, ended up having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spent a dime. We called it a back-to-pay-for wedding. Emotional damages from my parents. I think my husband is okay. He just confirmed that I'm right. He was enjoying the whole thing more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws. But here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents' sister and husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated since the bride always comes out late. They'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it. She'd walk down the aisle by the time I heard what happened. It would be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations. My husband took that to my parents' place. My sister still lives with them, so he showed them as proof that he'd ruined the dress. He said he had to go back to me because I was raging, and he needed to calm me down. He told them he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our real security hidden initially. When the guests and my parents arrived, they only saw a woman with a list of names to check. We only brought out that the actual security guy looked like a bodyguard. We told him not to let my sister in and said we'd give him a generous tip if he kept our instructions confidential. It wasn't long before the moment arrived. My parents got a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad signaled for the ceremony to start. My bridesmaids had been prepped to follow his lead, so they did without checking with me. After they all took their places, my dad stood at the entrance. While I was waiting, a friend who wasn't in the wedding party texted me to get ready to avoid suspicion if my husband or bridesmaid started texting. This friend, my husband's ally, was as eager to stir drama as he was and didn't mind not being a bridesmaid as soon as my dad took his position. The bridal song began, the doors opened, and I entered. My dad was shocked to see me. He tried to look behind me but couldn't see the venue entrance from where he had no idea what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID and it was her. He left me with a mumbled something, and gasps and confusion filled the room. The friend on the plan loudly asked what happened. I lied and said tearfully that my husband and I had agreed that if my dad abandoned me, I should say that to make him look as bad as possible. The tears weren't just I was trying to play it cool, but I was really hurt and trying not to cry. The friend then loudly asked what he meant by, "It shouldn't be you," so that everyone could hear and spread it. She said, "I will go and check," and ran off. We planned this so she could create chaos with the security and prevent my dad from returning to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned that he might need to. His frantic dash to me made me smile. I strolled down the aisle, overhearing whispers as people discussed what had happened. Some left to check as well when I reached my husband. Everything was fine. He comforted me, joking that my sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar. He also reassured me he'd handle my parents. We got married without any further issues. My parents didn't come back. I noticed a lot of people leaving and returning during the party. No one had the nerve to tell me what was going on. Someone whispered in my husband's ear, and he went out. He returned later with a thunderous expression, but he whispered to me that he needed to go hide before he broke character and started smiling. It worked. Here's the summary from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I got afterwards. My sister showed up in a wedding dress. The security guy refused to let her in, even though we had agreed she could come. He told her she must be at the wrong venue. There was already a bride there, so we tipped the security guy very well as promised. My dad tried threatening him with the police, claiming he'd never heard of him so he couldn't be working there. The security guy agreed to call the police since he was hired by us and was just doing his job. My dad realized it would be too late and tried to demand that he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over and started shouting and insulting my sister. And asking what was going on. My mom showed up, and then some other people. By then, the wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do was try to fix it. Everyone who learned about it was horrified. They tried to salvage it, but it was too late. People started screaming and berating them. The three of them said it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband. When he was called over, my husband put on his best confused look and denied everything. He said, gaslighting. Gatekeeper girl boss LOL. He denied ever agreeing to such a ridiculous plan when they insisted he had. He demanded proof and of course they couldn't provide any. All the text exchanges they could show were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was screaming, crying, and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to hit my husband, but security and other people held him back. They said they didn't have proof because my husband told them not to text him. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient." Then he repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" He also said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lies ruin his wedding. Then he went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording because it was only for security purposes. Some people filmed parts of it, watching my parents and sister get torn apart by everyone who came out to see the drama. It was great to see them get a taste of their own medicine after years of being accused of things and not being believed. My mother was crying, my dad kept changing from purple to white, and my sister was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting that my husband was. People kept asking why he would agree, why there was no proof, and why they wanted my sister to do this at my wedding. They had no good answers. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground again. People said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me. Maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once. It felt like everyone was trying extra hard to be nice, positive, and excited about everything my husband said. The expensive food and drinks certainly helped. We had a blast. My husband kept up the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before heading off on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets. They tried to get tickets, but we thought that was risky. They could try to cancel them or something, so we refused. Since then, the three of them have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. It was a smart move because my sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat what she said because it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense. The important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation and called my husband a two. He's confronted a snake who fooled them for months. He wants to print and hang that on our wall, LOL. He also hoped but was certain that I'd get cheated on by him. She even suggested he was cheating on me. My husband took my phone, screenshotted the call logs, my sister's messages, and some messages from my parents. He demanded I pick up the phone and sent them. He also sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him. He kept up the delusion for a year. I never agreed to anything. He even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in the group chat begging my family for help. He said that I was now being harassed by them. He kept pleading with them to stop my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon. After they failed to ruin our wedding, he ended with a request that they not share our locations to prevent my parents from sending my sister over and claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite. My family assured him they'd handle it. My husband is a bit disappointed that my sister didn't disobey, so he could call her out again. We'll see if this lasts. I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life. They not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got back at them. Extra info: do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will wonder the same. I've pondered this all my life and still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for being spoiled, so I stopped trying. I've considered many possibilities. Based on what I've seen, I think it's this: they were unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted but also like a miracle child after so long. Given our small age difference, I think they didn't expect to have another child so soon or easily and didn't use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't. My mom was pregnant until it was too late, so they had to deal with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They're not well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help, and they resented me. Regardless, I've accepted that the reason won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted. It doesn't matter what they thought would happen. My husband and I have a theory that they never intended to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates. They made my husband that outlandish proposition. They didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept it. They also didn't want to look bad by doing it themselves. If they suggested it and were refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister while having an excuse not to give me a dime. But then, my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack without risking my sister turning on them. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.